Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. This is our December show for the Comics Masterpiece Club, and the book that we have this month is it's the epitome of that phrasing, the Comics Masterpiece. It is such a smart book. Anyway, let's get into that with our guests. And the book is Enigma. I didn't even say it. What a moron I am sometimes. Hey, so it's Enigma with Pete MILLIGAN and Duncan FEGREDO, and there they are. Hello, Pete and Duncan. How are you?
Hey.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for coming and taking time and doing the show. I want to actually prove just a teeny tiny bit of street cred here, because from my personal collection, here's the original first print of the trade. I don't have the original comics, but I have the original trade here. So that's how long I've loved this book, and it's really nice to have such a gorgeous version of this too. It's not just a great book, but this is like a really
something
nice
else,
version.
isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's spectacular.
Yeah.
A lot of work went into it. It was worth it, though, I think.
Yeah. Nice. So my first question is always the same with everyone, and it's kind of my favorite question, and it's why comics? Of all the ways you could be expressing of yourself, of all the things that you could be doing, what is it about comics? What is it about sequential stories that thrills you, that excites you, that makes you want to go?
Right, me first. Two reasons. I was really into art when I was young. In fact, art was my thing. And I thought art was going to be my thing. But I was also increasingly interested in stories, in writing, and in literature. And comics seemed to be the perfect way to marry these two interests, these two obsessions, really, of stories and art. And secondly, I had lots of stories in my head. I had lots of stuff I wanted to write about, and it seemed that comic books were just a fantastic way of getting this stuff out fairly fast, in a really exciting kind of way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. Well, we'll talk about early British comics more, but it seems to me that like part of the function, the reason is because you had a market for short stories that wanted that kind of thing. Whereas in America, that all comic books were superhero comic books essentially at that same time. It's kind of funny. Duncan, what's your why comics?
I guess it was the drawing first, obviously. Before I was even aware of comics, I drew because I think I fairly quickly realised it was the thing I was better at than most kids at school. And as a fairly sickly kid, I had asthma, still do. Spent a lot of nights awake with asthma, and I'd draw to distract myself. And when comics came on the scene, they were the British humour comics first, and I would draw the stuff. I'd draw the characters out of the comics. Most, actually, particularly Disney stuff. I remember again really turned on by Disney stuff. It was the drawing, it was the environments in the drawing. It was the story. It was storytelling. I think I was a reader of normal books, but comics, they had that added frisson of imagery, didn't they? And something like drawing, it spoke to me. And I soon learned at school also, it's like if you did something better than anybody else, you could be quite popular. I couldn't compete doing sports or anything like that, but I could draw, and it was like a magic trick as far as other people were concerned. So that was pretty much it, really, I suppose.
I love that. That it's a magic trick. Because it is.
Excuse me, Duncan. Are you popular now? Do you think?
Oh hell no! I never leave the house, so I didn't have to face the slings and arrows.
Yeah.
That's what the internet's for, isn't it? So.
Oh, that's funny. So I want to get back to the thing both of you were talking kind of in common about your love of early comics, and it really strikes me that in England, because you had the tradition of weekly comics, and there were so many different venues, and that there was a lot more demand for things that were in a wide range of storytelling. Is that? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if I may interject, I think the real difference between the British writers or the British comic creators was that we drew our influences less from. You were saying that it was all superheroes. I wasn't really that interested in superheroes. I mean, they seemed to be quite an American thing. I mean, I was reading literature, I was reading books from an early age. I was one of those guys that was quite good at sport, but I read a lot and I loved that stuff. And it seems to be when I was thinking about comic books, I wasn't thinking so much of what superhero can I create. I was thinking, what story can I create? Not necessarily superhero, not necessarily a comic book style story, but anything. And why not? I mean, why not the kind of story that you might write a short story about, or you might write a novel about? Why can't that be in a comic book, and why can't that be different from either of those two and have its own quality? And I think that where we differed, I think, from some of our American cousins, was that our reference, our points of reference, and our influences were less comic books, and certainly less superhero comic books, and more literature and more art. And I think that the American guys, fantastic, obviously, a lot of them were, a lot of their influences were other superheroes. So it became quite self-referential. And I think the British guys, one could argue, the British guys brought a different set of references into the equation.
Sure. No, 100%. I'm just sort of, I'm trying to suggest that that you have different kinds of weekly and monthly magazines there, or did at the time. There were things that aimed at boys, there were things aimed at girls, there was stuff that was humor, there was stuff that was action adventure, there was stuff that was war. Like it was a lot more of a range of material for your audience. But I think it was because of the kind of comics that were being published, right? In America, comics were still, trying to raise out of being taken seriously at all at that point in the early 80s, right? I remember when I opened the store in 1989, we were getting that first wave of stuff, but people would come in and still constantly be like, comic books? They still make these? Like that it was a thing at all. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, I know. It's really odd. I think you're right. I think that we did have our weekly comics or our monthly comics, and then 2000 AD I think was the game changer.
Yeah,
and I think it really was. I think it was where a lot of us cut our teeth. A lot of us started to all these ideas we had, which often were just normal creative kind of ideas. The way that was where we first started, I think, work through them with art and the mixture of art and words and stories. There's sometimes had a political content, sometimes had a satirical content. Excuse me. And I think 2000 AD had this post-punk kind of spirit, and I think I hadn't seen that before anywhere else. And I think that
it referenced other things as well, didn't it, Pete? I mean, it was referenced in movies like Star Wars and
it was absolutely
and politics. Other things fed into it.
100%. I mean, it was kind of like it was cross-cultural. I mean, it referenced other comics, it referenced comic books, it referenced movies, a lot of movies, anything that was kind of the culture of the. It referenced, including politics. And there was a sense that I got. One thing I found with some American comics that I read, probably because I didn't read enough of them, was that they didn't seem to have that sense of an authorial presence behind some of the stories. That they were fantastic stories and fantastic art, but there wasn't a sense of a single intelligence or a single set of beliefs and concerns and issues working behind that. And I think with 2000 AD, even at its most simple, there was a sense of a particular point of view at work there. And I think that was one of the things that made 2000 AD fantastic at the beginning.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think one of the major differences is that we got fucked by the Comics Code, for a long time, after the 50s, and it really reduced the number of places that were willing to publish art that was in any way challenging, right?
It's hard to be counterculture if the culture's not allowing you to do it.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm glad that we finally broke through that, and we, now it's kind of a sad joke to talk about those things, but yeah, that was still the case,
it's a constant thing that comic books are seen as superhero comics, first of all, and they're seen as, it's like comic books are a genre, and really comic books aren't a genre. I think comic books are an art form within which there are a number of different genres. I mean, I don't know about you, Duncan, but I've had a few times when I think I was interviewed by BBC one time on the radio, just about how comic stories were grappling with real issues, and that they were no longer kiddie comics, and that it was there to be able to do with what you wanted, and
they attempted to tell that story for about 10 years, didn't they? But it was
interview, real sort of serious kind of interview, and then when I heard it, they came on and they played the Batman theme to him.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was Comics Aren't for Kids Anymore, Zach Powell.
So everything, but basically everything, it was as though they hadn't listened to anything I'd said, which they probably hadn't, and maybe it wasn't worth listening to. It was like everything I'd said has been negated by that kind of like the intro music for 30 seconds.
Yeah, they had their one story they wanted to tell, and if you didn't actually fit that mold, then you'd be edited to fit that mold.
Right.
And they did that pretty much repeatedly with every documentary they ever made during the 80s and early 90s. So here we are again.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Enigma and where it came from. I don't just mean, we can talk about the mind part too, but I kind of want to talk about the publication history of Enigma, because I don't think that I've ever heard anybody really talk about Touchstone and Art Young's plan to do an imprint and what was going on there and how that worked. What can you tell me as someone who was involved, at least in some extent?
It was quite circuitous and convoluted. But I mean, Art Young was at the center of the storm. He was instrumental, really. Without Art, the book wouldn't have existed on a number of reasons. He originally he had started work for. He was working at DC at one time. Then he'd started work for Disney, from where Touchstone was created, and Art and I really got on very well, and we kind of was working on this book called Enigma for Touchstone, and it was going to be one of his first books, and then when Touchstone, Duncan, if I'm getting this wrong, let me know, because I could easily get it wrong. But when Touchstone didn't come to fruition, I think he went back to Vertigo.
Okay. There's a little bit more to this.
He brought the books that he liked with him.
Yeah. Do you remember? There was the issue, and I only learned this only a few years ago, even. That while Art was at, it's Touchmark, wasn't it? Like Touchmark for comics, like Touchstone for movies. So it's the adult side of comics.
The wonder it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. But there was an issue I didn't realize as I was drawing the book, and I think it's around issue 3 or 4, as I was drawing those issues. I heard that something was going down, that there might be a shift over to DC, and it was quite a shock at the time. It was, but what I didn't learn so many years later, that one of the things that Art hadn't confided with Disney, he had an assistant at Disney who knew every detail about the content of Enigma, of the storyline. He knew the twist. He knew what was going to happen with the relationship with Michael Smith and Enigma. Do you remember this, Pete?
Yeah,
but Disney didn't know
any homosexual angle on it.
Exactly, and there was a plan. If
they thought it was a hero comic, because there are superheroes in it.
Yeah.
In fact, at one time, Art said one of the higher ups said, there's a lot of talking in this, isn't there? And I said, well, yeah, just people talk in these books, you know, and they thought it was a superhero book, which it is in a sense, but it's kind of an anti-superhero comic book, but it's still, it involves superheroes, so I suppose one could argue it's a superhero book. But yeah, so they had no idea the whole gay angle.
Wasn't there a thing where if Disney put their foot down before about the gay aspects, that Enigma could have turned out to be a woman instead, changing the nature of the story entirely,
well, look,
and a really badly drawn woman at that. Let's face it.
Well,
thank goodness it didn't go that far.
Well, someone else would have written it because I wouldn't have. I mean,
no, I know. Well, obviously,
woman, but no, I mean, it was Art just chanced it a bit, but as it was, I think he thought that if they heard about it, they would be kind of like they would be kind of scared off. But when they started to read it and saw it develop, they'd be more likely to kind of embrace it and see it for what it was, and not just some kind of using the gay thing as some kind of easy kind of like thing for notoriety. But I think he thought that, or maybe just thought that if I hold on long enough, they'll be in so deep they won't be able to cancel it.
Well,
I don't know. That's a question for Art. Yeah.
Well, we have to remember, Enigma wasn't the only book at Touchmark. I mean, there was the Grant Morrison book, Sebastiano, and Mercy with DeMatteis, and oh, good grief, Paul Johnson.
We brought them all over to Vertigo, didn't they?
Yeah, they sure did.
Yeah.
And they were good books. I mean, they kind of when Vertigo launched as Vertigo, I think that the books that Art brought back from our Touchmark was a really important kind of like section of that initial kind of burst of Vertigoism, I think.
Yeah.
Well, they were the first original books, weren't they? Because I mean, Sandman was obviously strong, but it was an existing title at DC already. So I mean, obviously, good to be in Vertigo is a strong spine.
Well, the name Vertigo, I don't think quite existed then. I remember having a conversation with Karen Berger about potential titles for this. Before then, it would always be known as the Berger Books or the Karen Berger Group, you know. And she talked to me about, do I have any ideas for names for this new group? And I said, maybe we could call it Enigma Comics. Because I just thought in some ways, unless Enigma's my comic, would I get a piece of the action, you know, from this book? And she said, yeah, right, Milligan, nice try, you know, move on to it.
I didn't know that. Yeah. That's great.
I love hearing about those early days of Vertigo from your side, because, you know, from my side, that was right when I opened, was kind of when Karen was getting all of this stuff out and starting to transform American comics, you know, in that way, like making something that was viable. And, you know, ultimately we get great books like this out of it, which I just love. I don't actually know Touchmark. That's what I was going to ask. Do we know why Disney decided to just cancel the line of comics and not do it, rather than?
I think Art Young stole money, and he basically said, either you walk, we're calling the police, or we're calling the police. I think that wasn't it, Duncan?
Oh, offering the mouse powdered substances. I don't know.
I don't know. I've no idea. I think perhaps it was ill-considered. I think perhaps they hadn't really thought about it, and
I think so.
And perhaps the power of Art's persuasion kind of like got them into thinking this could be a great idea, and they thought it'd be a great idea, and it would have been a great idea. I think they probably hadn't thought about it deeply, and when they did start to think about it deeply, they probably just thought, we don't want anything of this. They didn't have the vision to see the comics would become this thing.
It's strange to me though, because Touchstone existed, and Touchstone did produce some movies at least that were that were interesting and had, you know, real ideas in them.
Yeah.
It's weird that they would get cold feet in that way, to me, you know.
They didn't have the vision to see the connection that was going to be happening, and how great it could have been for. I mean, how good could it have been for Disney if all those Vertigo books had actually gone to this thing called Touchmark?
Yeah.
I mean,
just think, Disney wouldn't have needed Marvel, would they? They had Enigma.
Yeah.
The whole world would have been different.
What would they need?
The whole world would have been different.
You might be a Marvelverse character at that point. So let me ask you a question about how you pitch a book like this, because it really strikes me that it's really kind of self-enclosed of an idea, structurally, if you know what I mean. Like, you know, normally if you pitch a comic, you know, it's a 1 or 2 paragraph kind of thing. How do you pitch a book like this where so much of what it is the art? I don't want to give away the end for you know, anybody who hasn't watched it yet, you know, or read it yet. How do you put that together? I mean, did that make sense as a question? I don't.
Yeah, it kind of does, but often it's about relationships in this kind of story. I mean, I was a friend of art, and I still am a friend, and we're all friends of art. And I think in this case, it was, we had a beer. I think I was in LA at the time. I think I talked to him about this idea I had about the thing you don't want to talk about, and also about how it would kind of use superheroes, but the superheroes would be used in a postmodern kind of way that it's not a usual way of using them, because he knew that I wasn't a superhero comic book writer, really, and that wasn't where my interests lay, but they could be used in an interesting way for this story. And I gave him the germs of what the story was about. It was about this comic book, which the characters start to come alive from it, and you know, and then it becomes a story about this thing which you have to buy the book to read to understand what it is. And yeah, I mean, that was because I had a relationship with art. I think we had a couple of beers one evening, sitting outside his hotel, and we thought we have to do this.
Simple as that.
Can I ask you a question, actually? I don't think I've even asked you this before. How fully formed was that entire concept of Enigma? Because I remember I didn't ask you, I don't think I ever had a synopsis at all, bar a few sentences from art. And I was still relatively new to comics.
I had the broad strokes. I mean, what's interesting about, I don't think I might be telling him this, but part of the impetus of the story for me, and part of, I think, the verisimilitude, to use a posh word, fancy word, was art at that time was coming out as gay.
Of course, yeah.
And it was quite a beautiful thing to see, really, because because it really was a sense of, I really did get a sense that you're a person who, you know, the word normal is a word which is bandied around, and it's a very strange and loaded kind of a word. But I was really struck by the sense that art was, he became a more normal person for what his normal was as he became gay, if that makes sense. For example, I would be at some kind of do or some kind of party with art when he was still ostensibly straight, and you know, I'd say to him, look, I'm in a relationship at the moment. If you kind of see a girl, if you see a young woman and you want to leave me, I'm okay, mate, you know. And he never did. Because he wasn't that interested. Actually, that he wasn't that interested. And it struck me that when he did start to self-realize, he became much more centered, became much more, as if like he became the correct version of Art Young, and it was quite beautiful to watch. And some of the scenes in Enigma were drawn from. He took me to a gay bar. He started to then explore in Los Angeles, and he took me to a gay bar in a club, and it was very interesting because as a straight person to be in a place where you are more, if you like, objectified in a more open kind of way. I think the way that women are all the time. I think it was really useful and interesting kind of like experience, and it's one that I use in the book when Michael first goes into a bar and just the way he's feeling. I drew a little bit on my own experiences, my own feelings when Art's on his journey. When Art took me to one of these clubs in West Hollywood, and so it's inextricably linked to my friendship with Art and to Art's own journey, and so it's some strange, cracked mirror image of what was really going on.
Nice. So Duncan, when did you come in on this? Like you? Oh, no, there he is. Okay. When did you come in on this? Because you said you just had a synopsis at first. So obviously it's a bigger story than what the synopsis was, right?
I'm back.
You're back. Okay. Did you get that question at all?
I didn't get that at all. Sorry.
No, not a problem.
I managed to kick the trolley the camera was on.
Yeah. So the question is how when did you get involved? How did you get involved? And you said earlier that you just had a couple sentences of a description.
Oh right, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Art had been the first thing I did for DC was Kid Eternity's 3 books, and each book had a different editor. Karen edited the first one, Art edited the second, Elisa Whitney edited the third. I don't think anybody had the stamina to cajole me to get artwork out of me. You know, it was kind of like they were burned out after an issue and they had to move on. But it couldn't have been that bad because I think I was approaching the end of the 3rd issue, and Art gave me a call and said, I want to ask you to do a book, and it's a new thing. It's not for DC, and he wouldn't give me any more information at the time because I assumed nothing else was finalized. He said, all I can tell you is it begins with E, and there's 2 books. Yeah, because it was going. I don't think he at the time there were 2 books he had in mind, and one was Enigma, and the other was The Extremist, which of course was also by Pete with Ted McKeever.
Yeah. There's a 3rd book called Edward, but that never well, did it?
Yeah, yet to be released.
Yeah, really.
Obviously. Yeah, and and without knowing any more, just knowing it was Pete was enough. Pete was one of my favorite writers. He did some of my favorite stuff, certainly. At 2000 AD, with Brendan McCarthy. I was a big old fanboy, so I was very excited. I'd gone from Grant Morrison to Pete Milligan. Things were looking up, so I was excited. Yeah, that's it. You only had to write the letter E, and I was excited. E for excited, and willing to sign on the dotted line. There was no dotted line at that point.
Well, you were an easy date, weren't you?
It's gotten a whole lot harder, believe me. These days, I require at least a sentence, a paragraph, and a check, or at least a wire transfer.
Yeah.
But yeah, changing times.
But Duncan's artwork was fantastic when he came on. I mean, it was really, and what was interesting was because it seemed such a kind of a private kind of idea between me and then my relationship with Arts, and it was really interesting then to get this other person that came in who then started to kind of visualize it. It was really interesting to see this thing, which had been such a personal interior kind of a project. So it was really interesting. And there's a funny story about Duncan's artwork. he was fairly new when he started work on Enigma, wasn't he, Duncan? I mean,
yeah, I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. I just cracked doing painted
yeah, okay.
artwork, and I didn't know what to do with line work.
Being polite. Okay,
Yeah.
but what was interesting is that during the course of the book, of the comic books, I think one could argue that Duncan just got better. His line work became more sure, and there was a kind of a slight change in the style as Duncan just got better at it.
Mm-hmm.
He just got better. And we were at a panel one time, and someone in the audience asked me what was going on. You know, the artwork was kind of changing as the book progressed, and things, and I kind of like came up with this piece of old nonsense, and I said that, well, it's very scratchy at first, the artwork, and it's very all the drawings are slightly off to indicate that Michael himself was not quite realized. And as Michael, the hero, became more and more self-realized and understood himself more, so therefore were the drawings of him more reflective of this more self-realized state of mind. Complete nonsense, of course, but it really went down well. And
it was great.
Yeah, but the thing is, a year later, I was at another convention and I heard a similar question being asked, and Duncan answered with exactly the same answer. And I think by now he believed it.
No, I was relating the same story.
It become the truth. You know?
It was a good version. It was a better version of reality. There's no doubt about it.
It's become true now. Did you believe it, man?
It was self-fulfilling. It was self-fulfilling. The reality was, I mean, it was during that Spin Across America tour, wasn't it? And I think the second issue just came out as we were on the tour, and I was horrified by the artwork, and I was apologizing to everybody. It gets better, honestly. It gets better. It gets so much better. I was just. I've never changed, really. It's like the last thing I did was always awful, ultimately.
And the early stuff was nice. I think it had this scratchy, unfinished quality.
Yeah, it's different. There's an energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think always had energy, and I think that was the thing that was maintained all through the book. Even when you got perhaps my more technically efficient, it was still kind
of clarity.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I mean, I actually find the technique in these early issues to be really spectacular because
it's great.
Well, because it's clear that it's clear in hindsight, at least, that this is because you were painting prior to this, doing, and you're trying to figure out how to get the light and shadow that you get in paint with a pen and ink, and it's actually
that's it.
It's a really nice technique, I think.
It's a really interesting point, Brian. There's a real sense of him kind of working things out on the page.
Yeah. That really literally was it. It kind of it is really hard. I mean, putting this book together, scanning all the old artwork, going for the back matter. It was a hard thing for me to do because it was literally like peering into an alien brain that I couldn't actually comprehend. I couldn't see. I couldn't make sense of my actual process anymore. It was the strangest thing. It really was. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, if I'd actually gone in, if I'd had a highly developed superhero style, it would have been utterly wrong for the book anyway, I think.
Completely. Yeah, because we didn't want. I didn't want the superheroes. The superheroes in that start to come alive out of Michael Smith's childhood favorite book. I didn't want them to look like normal superheroes. I wanted them to have a real sense of that. Well, and they don't.
They really don't
at all.
Yeah, really. Well, it was for two reasons. One, because I didn't really know that much about superheroes myself. Obviously, I knew them. I'd written about them, but they weren't my thing. I wanted a real sense of a particular, distinct personality behind this comic book, and not just kind of like guy that wrote comic books at all. So what the distinct character of the guy, you know, who's a gay person from the counterculture who smokes dope and has a certain kind of outlook on life, and I wanted that to be reflected in the kind of superheroes that he produced. So these weren't the kind of people that would be fighting Superman or knocking around with the Avengers. They were a bit weird, like their creator, you know. And I wanted that there, and which is why Duncan, who was not really a superhero artist at all, he was just an artist who did comics, and I think, I think that's why it works. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely spoke to me. I mean, it's the nicest stuff. The stuff that works best is it's the small, quiet. It's the talky stuff. It's the small, quiet moments, and it's actually the stuff, as it's turned out, that I've enjoyed. I've always enjoyed doing more. Just people having a conversation. The boring stuff, the talking head scenes.
Sure.
I've always liked doing that stuff, and I still do. It's fun. It's fun to pull a performance out of characters to draw you in. So you're not just reading it; you're internalizing it. So you are experiencing it, and that at the heart is what I like about comics. It's the thing. Movies are great, but they're passive. You're watching them. You do bring experiences to them, but it's kind of like they're running in parallel or on a different track at the back of your mind. But with a comic, you are controlling the speed.
Well, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Really good point. I think that's why horror works differently in comic books than it does in movies. I mean, horror works in movies because you don't have control over the speed, and what's happening next is happening next, whether you want it to or not, and it just happens. And
you have sound. You've got camera movement.
Yeah,
you can create those fake shocks. You can't do that in a comic. You can do it with a page turn, but
you turn at your own speed, don't you? I mean,
exactly. You can still be taking in the rest of. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that happens with comics, I find, is that it's very common for me to go backwards while I'm reading a comic. You know, I'll read the first 8 pages and then go, wait a minute, actually, I want to go read page 4 again, you know? And you can't do that in a movie. Even in a novel, it's much more difficult to do it, I think. It's just something about the medium of comics and its use of time and space, I think.
With
The
a book.
audience is complicit in the story on some level. And I think in terms of Enigma, especially, the audience is complicit because the audience is being narrated to by the central notion of the enigma, essentially. You know?
Yeah, I mean, we won't give the ending away. It's I think Grant Morrison called it one of the strangest and weirdest kind of endings he's ever seen in comics. But the story behind that was I wanted something that operated like a third-person narrative, but I wanted that narrative voice to have a point of view. I wanted everything in it to have a point of view. I wanted the comic books to seem to, the superheroes to seem to have a point of view, to come from someone with a point of view, not just a blank superhero. But I wanted the narrative voice to have an attitude towards the characters.
It's the moment when you do this, Pete. Pay attention.
Yeah, well, it was just kind of like I just wanted him to have a point of view. You know, some narrative voices, I find with them, and this is in novels as well. I think that if it just becomes a bland, grey, it's almost like a Greek chorus with no kind of connection to the action. I think that when that Greek chorus actually can be affected by the action, becomes more action, and has an attitude towards that action. It becomes like as in Medea, when when she's going to do this terrible, Greek stuff right here, but when she starts, when Medea's going to do this terrible thing and poison her children and her husband, the Greek chorus really reacts to it. I mean, they're not passive bystanders. They are affected by the action, and I believe they tried to even stop it. So I think that was a really amazing piece of breaking the fourth wall a bit, and this what is usually used as a technique for narrative device suddenly becomes engaged in story. And I think without saying without saying that put myself on the level of Aeschylus or whoever wrote there.
But you are.
Yeah, well, it's nothing to do with that. But I wanted the narrative voice to have to be a bit annoying as well. I mean, to kind of like some people are a bit fucking annoying. I'm sorry, you might have to bleep that out. I presume you don't want me to swear anymore.
No, swear all you fucking want.
Oh, good. I don't want to fucking swear. Yeah. So I wanted I want everything to feel a bit different from a normal superhero book. And I wanted everything to have a point of view, and even if that point of view was a bit narky, was a bit unpleasant or irritating, and yeah. I think we managed to be a bit irritating here at times.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Life's like that.
Yeah. Well, as I say, and I think that it keeps the audience complicit in the storytelling, and I think that's fantastic. I also love the fact that the story proper doesn't end, and in almost any other thing that I would encounter that I would hate that, but I really love it about Enigma that you just don't know, and it's fine.
I'm trying to think of a way of. Excuse me, I've got this. My lungs are phlegm factories at the moment. They're just like producing it. I'm trying to think of a way of explaining my rationale behind that ending without giving the ending away. But I wanted it to be the opposite of what you'd expect and want in a normal superhero comic book. The very thing that a superhero book would normally be building up for, that big moment, that big fire, that big who's going to win the big fire. I wanted to avoid that, and by avoiding it, to say that this hasn't been that kind of book. This has been about this over there. This stuff over there is the important stuff, and this isn't.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing construction. Is all I can say. Actually, wait, hold on. We've got a question that I need to ask. I need to put the question up. It's from Eric Heiska. I read somewhere that Peter has requested some characters to look like an amalgamation of himself and his art. Is this true? And was the design of Michael Smith conceptualized in this?
I can answer this.
I think you'll be hearing from my lawyer tomorrow.
I remember asking you.
Michael Smith, more like Duncan, anyway. I think.
Well, he did look he was kind of based on me at the time, yeah, a little bit, which is funny because I remember asking Pete, when the mask is finally removed, what do you want Enigma to look like? He said, I think it's just like a model, some classical chiseled, a little like me.
That was a sense of that was humor. An attempt, or basically there was an attempt to be humorous, but also I was waiting for you to say no, we'll make it look like you, Peter. Perhaps Enigma looks like how I believed I might want to look, but yeah, he was just I think.
Well, we're lucky it looked half decent at all at that point. We were honestly.
Oh, but see, I can't think of any character in the book that looks like me. I can't. I think.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't based on you. It was. I think there was a model, a male model that I'd seen some pictures of, and of course there was no internet at the time for searching these things out or anything. So I just trawled through my wife's fashion magazines.
It worked. And it was
yeah, it came. There were a couple of shots. I said, "That's it, right there," and I could never reproduce it more than once. I was hoping originally, an envelope girl originally was supposed to look like Linda Evangelista in my mind, and it never did.
Yeah, was art?
But she looked okay.
Did Arts get in there at all? I mean, young?
No, it's that. Yeah, I mean, it's that problem. inevitably the main character always ends up looking like itself because you've got the reference. And I mean, he pretty much dressed the way I dressed at the time. So it was, I had a mirror in my studio and I could act stuff out. If I'm drawing it,
Yeah,
why change anything? And you know,
yeah,
I had
it was quite like
more hair, a little bit more idealized, I think, and less
a bit
mass. But it was 30 years ago, so I can be forgiven.
I want to ask you about the back matter, and in relationship to the production of the art, Duncan, because I'm astonished that this stuff exists in this form for you to have scanned it.
Yeah, there's more. There's so much more, but there's only so much space. Yeah. I hoard. I mean, I used to scan my pencils at every stage. Not scan, Xerox. Yeah. So I'd have multiple versions of pages. It's why I could actually correct a couple of the panels in the comic, actually, which were edited for some reason. I can't remember. There are a couple of things which got changed by production. I don't know why, and I managed to get them back to the way that I'd drawn them originally. There's a minor bit of censorship I managed to replace, largely because I just kept everything. And I spent months scanning all this dusty old crap last year. Actually, was it last year or a year before? Time has no meaning. But yeah, I mean, it's great. I've got to give huge credit to Richard Brunin. I dumped so much material on him and said, you decide.
Yeah.
And and he was great. He honed it down, made sense of it all, got it into the nearest sort of sense that something would make some sort of sense. And then we'd go back and forth with add notes. And yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work. It was seems to have spent months doing this stuff. But honestly, it was kind of like, you know, we've been waiting to get this book out for so long.
Yeah.
It was worth it.
It's a thing of beauty now, isn't it? And I really do believe that the story has the book that it deserves. I think the production value, everything about it, I think it's just great. I think it's a thing of beauty.
Yeah. Have to thank the production at Dark Horse actually for all the work they did on remastering the art, because
I think you have to thank Karen as well.
Yes, obviously, Karen Berger, of course.
Yeah. Did you? So you said that you restored some stuff. I'm assuming it's all pretty minor stuff. Yeah, but so how did you approach it? Did you do it forensically? Did you like go each page and find the original art and like compare the two? And
no, I didn't need to, because I knew the stuff which had been changed before.
Oh, okay, you remember it all these years later. Okay,
I can. It's some of it's really tiny. I'll give you an example. If I can find the page, I should have actually marked these pages up.
Yeah, they don't have page numbers, so it's hard to.
It does not help, does it?
What are page numbers?
Yeah, there's no page numbers.
That's insane.
Oh. I like pagination in a book. What can I say? The reproduction of this is just really spectacular.
The guy doing the production, and I forget his name, and I apologize for that, but he went to great lengths to correct some of the misregistered color stuff that was printed wrong 30 years back, where you got haloing around the black lines and whatever. The blacks are solid black. The colors are much more representative of Sherilyn van Valkenburg's colors, which are beautiful. It's as gorgeous.
And all that still existed too. That's the other part that surprises me, I guess, a little.
Well, what the pages included in the back matter?
Yeah,
I think a few of the pages have been returned to me, and I just hoarded it along with everything else.
Yeah,
but I only had those 3 pages, I think, that were included. But
I see.
I'm sure the originals still exist somewhere, unless it's one of those things you either, back then, whether you could sell it, I don't know.
Yeah. And so in terms of your process, you it looks like you're touching every page at least twice. That you're doing a layout for yourself, yeah, and then
Yeah.
on the actual board, you're doing the penciling.
Yeah. I mean, it really ultimately just comes down to whatever it takes. I mean, initially it would have been a case of like doing thumbnails, layouts, whatever it took to make sense of the story beats, drawing it out full size. But I'd Xerox the pencils, and often I'd, if I wanted to rescale something, there's a travel shop near where I used to live, and they had a photocopier. So I'd walk 10 minutes around the corner, get them to photocopy, do photostats and reductions at various scales. I got to know the girl to run this place really well, and they copied every page of that book for me multiple times. Wow. And I would lightbox stuff that would need to be scaled up or scaled down, and what literally whatever it took. The pages, the early pages particularly, and you could see it in the back matter of the reproductions of the originals. There is spatter over them. There's whiteout correction. There is patch paper. There's redrawn patch whiteout over the top of that. Whatever it took for me to actually get something down that was actually printable and readable. So it literally whatever it took. Oh, I found one of the corrections, but I don't think I better show that one. Actually, one of my favorite corrections was a really tiny one, and it's actually this panel here, and it's nothing to do with the artwork, but right here, Michael's exclaimed to the Enigma, spoilers here, about being a character from his favorite comic. Yeah. Except in the script, it was my favorite fucking comic. And for whatever reason, John Costanza, beautiful lettering, either Art said, take fucking out, or John didn't like it, but it was removed, and I managed to squeeze it back in there. So once again, it's his favorite fucking comic.
It helps with the sentence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's important. Yeah,
that's the only reason it was there in the first place. The rhythm.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was hilarious when I'm so often when I would repeat scripts, my reaction would be, you have a physical reaction. I would laugh. It's everything ripped off the page like that. It's what made it such a joy to draw. I mean, I was just trying to keep up with it, but it's just like these characters demanded the performance to support what was there on the page already.
Well, this is one of the things that really strikes me about when I look at your thumbnail process is how nearly finished these are. I mean, they're not print ready, right? But they're like the layout. You're doing a lot of black that you don't necessarily need to do necessarily.
No, I get carried away with stuff, and I'm testing stuff out, and very often, there are very often end up being multiple versions. I mean, it's something I still do today. I mean, I get. It's at the end, it's that thing. It's like you've got a script in your hand, and there are many ways. If it's a film, there are many ways to direct it. There are many ways to light it. Where are you going to put the camera? What are the characters wearing? How are you going to block this scene? And sometimes the choices that would come to me they were innumerable. And I mean, it's the process every artist goes through when they're translating a script into a comic at the end of the day. And it's kind of like you end up, if you have too many of these ideas, you have to sort of you're looking what came before, what comes next. And you're trying to think like, well, if I do this here, then I know that I can't use that same angle on the next page. So it's kind of like, which is going to have the greatest payoff. So it ends up taking me so long to do everything because I'm constantly weighing these things up. Frustratingly, I mean, very often the layouts are as good as it gets because I think it's because it's always the ideal version because it can always potentially get better. The moment you start finally doing the art, the final artwork, the moment the pen goes down, you're in the world of compromise. It's diminishing returns. You're never going to quite approach the final version of what was in your head. But by doing all the prep beforehand, making those decisions, you try to get as close as you can to it.
So Duncan, as the story went on, were you doing less of that? Was that why?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was. I had to.
Assured.
Yeah, I mean, especially by, I think there's some layouts for issue 8 in there, and by that stage, things were really late. It's great because the artwork's all in now. It's not late anymore, except for the delays in publishing, of course.
Yeah.
But that's another story. That one's not on me. That's why those pages were more realized in ink, because I was essentially, they were my pencils really. I would blow up those layouts then, and then I could more directly light box them and not change them. So it was a bit more of a direct route. I was trying to cut out more stages. It's one of those things. I mean, I change it up every time I do a book.
And do you feel this constant blowing up and changing and having to go over and over and over reveals a massive flaw in your character? Do you think that I can argue?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's fucked up, isn't it? I know it's fucked up. You know it's fucked up. But as long as it gets done in the end, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
yeah, and I'll say, I talk to an awful lot of cartoonists, and no two people do it exactly the same way. It's kind of brilliant and spectacular. It's one of the things that I most love about comics is that there's not a right way to do them.
The biggest compliment I had was
unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really I was going to say, the biggest compliment I had was one time talking to Howard Chaykin, and he said, "You do this stuff really quick, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, it looks like that, doesn't it?" But you know better than that. That's the trick. The ultimate thing is, like, whatever ends up on the page in the end, no matter how labor intensive it is, and no matter what's come before, is trying to make sure it looks like it's just happening.
Yeah.
You don't want something to stop you in the tracks, even if it's ridiculously detailed. You want it to still feel like it's got some energy to it, like it's just happened. It's the swan on the water, graceful above. Well, I'm not saying my art's graceful, and certainly not at this stage.
That's really interesting. So it's like
all the shit's going on under the water, You
have to work really hard to look as though you don't work at all.
Yeah.
When
I'm playing games, I'm working hard.
Reminds me of the quote about Mark Twain. Apparently, wrote someone a letter once, and he said, "Excuse the fact that this letter is so long. I didn't have time to write a shorter one."
That's brilliant.
It's quite appropriate.
Well, that's interesting then, Pete. How do you change your writing style for your different collaborators? Did you write this differently once you started getting pages from Duncan?
I mean, I think about that. Yeah. My first instinct is to say no, but I was looking at the pages coming in. I was being affected by them. So I think, how can I not have been affected by it? What I was seeing. I think the central arc of the story, what the story was about, what was happening to the central character, I mean, that remains the same, because that was part of the story. But the other stuff about the superheroes, and when I actually saw, you imagine these crazy kind of people, and then you see them, I think it must then affect the way you want to talk, the way you put words into their mouths.
There was the stuff with the truth in the church, and I don't think you actually wrote him as getting bigger. And I decided to make him, as the truth gets bigger, he got big. It was a visual metaphor. No, I really liked it, and I did wonder whether you changed anything like that, anything with that as a result when you saw the pages.
No, but I think sometimes you did do stuff I didn't ask for, and I think that's great. I think
smart like that.
But that's what happens as soon as you when you initially write a script. It's. I mean, I never when I think about the characters. When I think of the characters that I'm writing and the scenes that I'm writing, I realized recently that I don't think about them as two-dimensional things that are going to be drawn. I see them as moving characters. I envisage.
That's how they feel to me as I've read them. Any of the books we worked on.
I envisage them as living, breathing, three-dimensional characters moving around. So then it's always a bit of a shock when you see them, as it were, regurgitated into these two-dimensional versions of what you had. So there's been a big shift there. And so I think that you then think, okay, then, so this is actually what they look like. This is in reality. But then when you come to write, you still think about them as these living things. So it's like Duncan is revealing their two-dimensional forms. But in my head, there were three-dimensional forms of this. Does that make any sense at all?
It makes a certain amount of sense. Is this is this as true if you're writing Batman?
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, he's just Batman is always two-dimensional. No, he's not actually. Batman's fantastic, you know. Yeah, right. I'm really glad I didn't create him, you know.
No, but you know what I mean. The difference between your own story and your own characters and doing work for hire. I think you're right. I think there was different. Even then, there comes a time because whenever I've done a work for hire, like written Batman or something, I've always tried to kind of. I think if you're going to do a decent job at it, you've got to, in a sense, make it your own. For that time that you're writing it, it is as though you've created this character, and it is telling a story that you want to tell, and you're not just being dictated to by this icon and by this history. You have to, if you like, use it in a way that you inhabit it. So in a sense, it is three-dimensional to me, until I then see it again in its rendered in its two-dimensional iteration. You know? Yeah.
You feel like you have to get into the mindset. You have to believe it, otherwise you can't live it.
Well, I think you just have to make it your own by the time that you're writing it, whether it's John Constantine or whether it's Batman. When you do write it, it has to be your character. Now, obviously with Batman, you have to leave him in a certain kind of place that is not too far distant from where you picked him up on. But you can still. I was asked. I was at this thing called London Content a couple of weeks ago, which was a media and film kind of event in London, and there was a comic books session we talked about, and I was asked about just that actually, like when you write characters that work higher, how different it is from the normal stuff that I write and I like to write, which are my own stories. I said, well, there is a way in which you can use these amazing characters to kind of to tell stories that are very personal, and it's quite surprising. In the same way as, again, I'm not suggesting, in the same way as those fantastic Greek writers, Aeschylus, Euripides, and so on, they kind of used the myths that existed for thousands of years before them, and the stories of Medea and the stories of Oresteia and the stories of Agamemnon. These existed before them, but they still used them to say something about the society at that time. So for them, it was both this icon that they were dealing with, like Agamemnon was the kind of must have been seen as, I guess, like Batman, this thing that existed and was part of and was real in that it existed in this culture. And I think you can still work for hire and make it a personal story. I mean, for example, I wrote a story a couple of years ago, a Batman story, and I think I was inspired by. I've been to see the latest Batman movie, and there was all these. It was just like all this kit that Batman had, all this technical, expensive kit that he had, and it was kind of like he just had so much stuff. And I was thinking, well, you really need to have a lot of money to be able to buy all that stuff.
Sure.
Well, he seemed to be really then. He really seemed to be exist only because of the capitalist system. He really seemed to be a part of it. Like Wayne Enterprises and the capitalist side of it making money in the capitalist system was the only thing that enabled this version of Batman to exist. And so I kind of wrote a story where they had to really watch their money, because it was around the time of the financial disaster, financial crash, and Wayne Enterprises had hit the rocks a little bit. It was losing money. So every time Batman fired a rocket, he'd be told, well, that cost £500,000, and so you have to really watch the sense, you know. And so there was a way in which I had a personal reaction to something, and I managed to get it into a story, but still tell a kind of Batman story.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Jordan tells me we have another audience question, so let's put that up from Antoine. Hey, Antoine, that's cool. Have you ever been tempted to revisit the world of Enigma? Not to tell what happened at the end, but to tell other stories. The world was so rich, and it felt like there were more adventures to be told.
Yeah, tempted, but I guess never quite tempted enough to do it. Also, because that book was so special to me and to Duncan and to so many people that read it. Always thought one had to be really careful about what you did with it, and you certainly wouldn't want to look as though you were exploiting it in any way. And it just seemed to be such a thing of meaning, and one would always be loath to do something which, if you like, degraded that meaning slightly. And so even though I've thought about the world in which Enigma lives and his life beyond the story that we tell, and there's been talk about perhaps even some TV stuff, and I've had to think about other storylines that could happen, and I haven't done it. But what is interesting, Antoine, is it?
Yeah.
What is interesting is you're right. There is so many other stories that can be told from that book. There's the characters themselves. There's the relationship between Enigma and Michael. Seems to me fascinating. I mean, it's one thing, and it seems to be saying something about the nature of love itself. That the chase and the arrival at love is the thing that Hollywood movies and most stories tend to engage themselves with. But that thing that comes next tends to be not talked about. You know, the other side of love, which is, all right, then where are my socks? You know, but not only that, not only that, but I mean, Enigma is this amazingly beautiful, but he's a creature not quite human. And he's a superhero. What's it like being the lover of a superhero?
Yeah. Let me actually ask a question here, because one of the things that struck me really hard on the reread was how coercive Enigma himself is in the story, particularly in terms of the love with Michael. Now, Michael makes the correct and brave decision at the end of the story, but I think that Enigma's ultimately kind of horrible in a lot of ways.
Actually, it's really interesting you say that, because in thinking about what could happen next, one of the themes that I start to explore is how much of this, even though it's right for Michael and Michael's journey was right for him, how much of it has been manipulated by Enigma because it's necessary for Enigma.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting point that he picks up, and I'm glad he picks it up. And it would be, if I were to write anything else, either in another form like television or in another comic book, that would be one of the themes I'd explore for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Another question, Jordan? Or not? Oh, there is. Okay. Also from Antoine. Question for Peter. If memory serves, Enigma and the Extremist came out very close together. Both characters go on journeys of identity. What was similar and what was different about writing these books?
Well, they were quite different books. But you're right; they're both about identity. But I think that's one of the recurring themes in my books. I mean, I don't think it's just reflective of that I continually search my own identity, or maybe I do without knowing it. And this is the way I do search my identity. But they both obviously came from a strong feeling I was having at that time about identity. These were times, I think, it wasn't just a personal thing. I think that they were perhaps times when there was a lot of sense of searching for identity culturally in that time, and also sexually and emotionally around that time. And the people I was talking to, I think, were going on those kind of journeys. And I think those both stories were born from those feelings of if you like, this slight mix that was happening in culture and in personal life around that time. And for some reason, these two strange creatures were born from that time.
Yeah. Just to sidebar that, is there any is the Extremist going to ever come back into print? Do you guys own it? Have control of the rights the way you own Enigma?
Yeah, we own that.
Yeah. So you think that's going to come back to print at some point?
Well, it may come back in some form.
Yeah.
Or other, Yeah. But because I think it's got such potential to move on to tell more stories. Because I quite like I think Borges, the fantastic Argentinian writer Borges, he often talked about in his short stories he would talk about novels that had existed. He would reference novels, and he would kind of like praise a novel in a kind of a paragraph. And he said that he found the idea of writing a novel unconscionable because it was so it was just so big. He thought it much better to write a short story where someone referenced a short story as though it existed, and just in one paragraph spell out all the salient points that he would have covered if he'd ever bothered to write this novel. And in some ways, I like to do a comic book short story series that, if you like, scratches the edge of this world, tells a really important story, but suggests a world that exists beyond the pages of this comic book.
Yeah,
I'd say. I've decided that's what I do. Yeah.
Very good.
It's not going to be good for a page rate, though, is it? It's small, big ideas, small amount of pages, less money.
Yeah, but I've got a lot of ideas. I want to tell them.
Yeah.
Nice idea.
So I wonder, as an artist, Duncan, how easy is that for it on your side, right? Because in a way, writing a script is a relatively easy and quick business, right?
Excuse me.
You know what I mean, though, right? Like
I'm sorry, mate. You can talk about
physically, it's a faster process than doing the art.
You can write crowd scene a lot faster than you can draw it.
Can I just interject? All joking aside, yes, the process of when I sit down and I have the idea and I kind of write the script, but the process of that idea gestating, having that idea gestating, and that idea forming, that can take a long time.
1,000%. I was not trying to suggest otherwise. I meant the kind of the physical execution part of it.
Okay.
And so what I wonder as an artist, Duncan, is how you decide how and what to take on. Because I would put it in terms of this. So your first two works were Kid Eternity and Enigma. Kid Eternity is controlled by a company that will probably never ever put it back into print again. I mean, they might for the 35th anniversary edition, maybe, but you know what I mean? Like you're probably never gonna ever earn another dollar on that ever again in your life. Whereas this, you own at least a portion of it. I'm curious about that, because for the reasons that I was saying. Because when we look, Peter, when we look at your bibliography, right, it has its own Wikipedia page. That's how long it is, right? Duncan's bibliography is like 12 books,
Yeah, I think. Yes, I think it's right. You do need to have you need to have lots of ideas and write. I mean, and I think that of course. I mean, I could be writing 3 monthly comic books at the same time if I so wished.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that Duncan would find it quite difficult to be drawing 3 ongoing monthly comic books at the same time.
I wouldn't even consider it.
I think it's struggling to one, wouldn't it, at the moment?
One has always been a problem.
Yeah.
I've never been fast. I can be fast, but I have to do it in a different medium entirely. Yeah, I mean, I make the best choice I can for the book I want to do, and hope that it's going to work out.
It works. Whatever you're doing really works. So.
Yeah, but I mean, it's why when I was doing Hellboy, which was, it's been successful. I don't own it, obviously, but I do make royalties from it, and and it's good. But when Mark Miller suggested let's do it was a 4-issue series originally, MPH, 10 to 5.5, I guess. Why I said yes. I just said to Mike, I need to go do this because I should probably own something else, or half own at least. And Mike completely understood it, and so I wanted MPH, and that worked out really. It was a good choice, largely because of Mark selling MillerWell to Netflix, obviously.
Yeah.
Had I not done that, I would have drawn probably and found an easier time drawing. Well, maybe not easier, drawing more Hellboy, and it would have been steady with the royalties, but the result would not have been the same. So, I mean, it was a good decision. It's why I chose to again, Poiston Hellboy, to do some storyboarding work. It's the first chance I had to do some storyboarding work for Noah, Darren Aronofsky's movie, which had, should we say, mixed reviews, but it was for me, it was a great experience. It was a chance to work using skills I'd learned in comics, and just watching movies or whatever. Translate that into doing storyboards.
What's the difference between those two things, Duncan? What's the difference in sort of pacing and timing and those kinds of things? Did you have to rewire your brain to make the jump?
I mean, it was a struggle. It was. I kind of gotten. Yeah, it was a struggle because I wasn't really. So I wasn't actually, while I was on the production or pre-production, I guess, I was working from this very room. I wasn't working alongside any of the other art departments in the Protozoa stable, Aronofsky's production company. I was here on my own, and I would just converse with Darren every now and then via email and the odd FaceTime. And he'd send me shot notation to go with the script, and I would work on it. And I would have no idea. I never had any idea on how much I was supposed to be doing. Am I doing too little? Am I doing too much? I had no idea. All I knew was I started on Monday and ended on Friday, and that in itself was a revelation, because comics bleed through the entire week, or always had done for me. It's like if there were pages to be drawn, I was always behind. I was always working or worrying or playing games and worrying that I should be drawing, whatever. On the storyboards, I was producing what I was producing, and I'd get paid every Friday regardless. And that was a weird thing. But I had no idea. I had no marker of where I was in the production. No one was telling me, we need more of this, we need, or whatever. It took a while to realize that it's like, oh, hey, if it was going badly, I would have been sacked by now anyway. And I was piling out quite a lot of material. I was working scenes over and over and over, coming up with quite a lot of creative stuff. Certainly in the initial stages. And the process is different in itself. Well, I mean, my process was different from the point of view of I wasn't making finished artwork. I was doing, for me, rough pencils and inks, and I was treating it like a rough open line style comic. And the drawings had real energy to them. I really liked doing this stuff. And what I liked doing was I liked not finishing the artwork. Finishing artwork is a pain in the ass. It's grind. The best a comic is ever going to get, from my point of view, is a thumbnail where it solves all the storytelling problems. And it's that's perfect.
Duncan, I think you could do a comic in that style.
Yeah, it's a mental.
I do as well, actually.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a mental leap. It's that problem. It's like it's doing the storyboards to make that translation. I was probably overdrawing them for storyboards as well. Storyboards isn't really about the drawing at the end of the day. It's about solving the problem of showing, okay, this is the camera setup, this is where the actors are, this is what's going on in the background. Right. And I was doing all this stuff at that stage with very little detail of what was actually. I was making shit up, I guess, at the end of the day. Yeah. But what was I going to say? There was another. You are considering other stuff. You've got technical stuff, whereas in comics you are controlling the end point of where you're placing the camera, where you're placing the characters, how the characters are relating to each other. You're not just directing it; you're editing it. Obviously, the edit is in the script as well with the dialogue. It's all there, but it's the combination. But you do have ultimately they have the control over it all. With a film, obviously, you're given an indication of in a two-dimensional drawing of something which would suggest not just character placement, but also from one shot to the next shot of what the camera might be doing in that point. So you've got a moving issue and a temporal issue. You've got movement and time, which is. It's implicit in a comic, and you're controlling it from the dialogue and the immediacy of the dialogue, and how you're showing, how you choose to portray it. But obviously, there's an actual visual, movies move in real time, and they're edited in real time. I don't know. I was making shit up, hoping it made sense. I did some wildly crazy stuff, and as I got used to the idea of manipulating these things, and I don't think I've only watched it once because I found it really hard to watch, because all I can think of I got that wrong, I got that wrong, and I realized, well, the reality is I was doing some fancy schmancy stuff in my storyboards, but there's a documentary at the end of the Blu-ray, which is the only part I've actually watched on the Blu-ray, actually. And there's a moment when Aronofsky says he had all these big ideas about what he was going to do with these big expensive sets, and it was his most expensive movie at that point. And I think when it got down to it, he said there with all these thousands of extras and cameramen and lighting and whatever, everybody around this very expensive production, it's like, well, instead of all this exciting stuff that was going to go between A and Z, it's like that I was planning to do, where I was going to move the camera here, there, and everywhere. It's like we're just going to get from A to Z as the quickest, most efficient way possible, because this is all costing money now.
Right.
You can be creative in the storyboards, but you can't. But at the end of the day, it's like the reality on a set. I can't imagine what it must be like to get that stuff in motion. I don't know. It was a great experience, though. What was the question originally? I forgot where we started.
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Oh no,
it's a conversation. I don't know.
Yeah, it was relevant, wasn't it? It was about the the relatively few books I've drawn. How do I choose them? And I'm not saying I'm choosing them from the point of view of the money. You try and make a point that's going to keep you interested. And it's not always worked out, but mostly has.
Yeah. I think we have one more viewer question. Let's pull it up. Oh, come on, Jordan. It's supposed to be ready. Mad Mod Monkey God I am really curious about whose Duncan fine art influences and comic book influences are, just in general, as well as at the time of working on the Enigma.
Back then, it would have been so coming through. So yeah, coming off Kid Eternity, the stuff that influenced that was obviously stuff like Dave McKean and Bill Sienkiewicz and George Pratt, Ken Williams. And I think there's probably still elements of that coming through in the line work on Enigma. But the interesting thing is, and I think I touch on it in some of the writing in the back matter for Enigma. I was coming into contact with a lot of other artists back then as well, like Alex Toth, and I'd come across Mike Mignola, which is funny. And there is stuff in Enigma where I recognise, oh yeah, that's where I was looking at a lot of Mike's work. And this is obviously way predating Hellboy and whatever. It was one of those things. Sherilyn had coloured Mignola's Fafford and the Grey Mouser, done a beautiful job on it. And I think I tell a story in the book about that. I was shocked to see that my work coloured on Enigma for the first time because it didn't look like Fafford and the Grey Mouser. But it's Sherilyn. How can that be? And then I realised it was me.
Right.
That was the problem.
The
It's always
problem.
me that's the problem. Well, yeah. If a glass can be full or empty, or half full or half empty, it's always half empty with me. It's not an intentional thing. It's just the way, it's just the way I tend to see stuff, I suppose. Yeah. What else was I looking about that? Obviously, I was very big into Klimt, and because of all the little whirly designs, all the Klimt-esque designs. I'm not even sure why that got incorporated at the time. I don't remember. It might have been in response to I had I remember getting a letter from Art. I think Art and Pete were in a convention in I think it might have been Italy, and Art had written letters describing what he thought Enigma should look like. And he described a guy in an opera mask and waistcoat and cloak and whatever. And I think as I was drawing that, it pretty much all the little walls and stars and whatever started to appear. So that's your Klimt right there. What do I look at now? I don't even know. I tend to. I mean, the stuff I tend to respond to is work like. Well, I mean, I've looked at lots of Jean Paul Leon recently in terms of comic art. Obviously, I mean, I always did. Is fantastic, and he is a fantastic artist, regardless of whether he's passed or not. It's an appalling loss, but got pulled back into his work again recently. It's as fabulous as it ever was. Mike's a big influence, obviously. Ian Gibson, who drew Halo Jones for 2000 AD, was a big influence back in the day. I adored the Halo Jones story, and in fact, there's still stuff I do now that relates entirely to the way Ian Gibson would visually tell a story. He had some ideas on if you change the angles, the angle of viewpoints in the panel, it would change. It would alter the way you would read, not just the image, but it would affect the flow of time because it takes the mind time to adapt to that angle. And just the way he would use body language. He had a very distinctive body language of the way he drew all his girls, which I loved. There's way too many, and if I start to list, I'll probably never stop. So I like people who draw really, really well.
Yeah, I'm there with you. We're getting close to the end, I think here. So there's two questions that we can end with here. The first is there anything you guys have upcoming that you'd like to plug that you're working on that you're especially proud of? Are you working on something? I mean, Duncan, I don't think we've seen a comic from you in 6 years or
No,
so.
I
Are you
take, I
working on
take,
something?
I am working on something actually. Yeah, I have been taking some time out. I took some time out after, when the Netflix deal went through. I took time out, and it's partially because I did things like I had an exciting cataract operation, and I broke my ankle, and these things tend to wipe time out completely.
Yeah.
But I was also the intention was like, hey, I've got some money. I've built a studio in the garden. I was going to go and paint. And it never really, it's all coincided at the same time as breaking my ankle. Never really happened. I could never quite work out what I was going to do. I thought I was going to do some more storyboarding. That didn't work out because of COVID. But I am finally back working on a comic. I can't really, it's not been announced, so I shouldn't
Yeah.
specifically. I think it'll go down well. I think people will like it. So
Very nice. Do you have a rough time frame when we can expect the mystery comic?
judging by the speed I'm drawing at the moment, no. I've got a very very loose schedule, but I'm trying. It's all thumbnailed. I've been through the first issue to the last issue. Every page is thumbnailed, and
Nice.
stuff is designed. Covers are designed. So now I've just got the laborious job of drawing the damn thing. But it's coming together. It's looking good actually. What I've done so far.
Yeah. About how often, like how many pages a day, a page, or how long does it take you to do a page? Is the question.
Yeah, I have no idea.
No idea. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it's too long at the moment. But I'm sure by the
Yeah.
time I get to the end of it, I'll have nailed it again.
Right.
I'm never going to be fast. I'm not. So
Yeah. That's
don't
very
hold
good.
your breath.
It's all right. It's all right. Well, it's worth waiting for, I think.
Well, thank you.
Pete,
So,
Pete, what do you want to plug?
Well, like Duncan said, I'm working on a number of projects, all of which I'm really excited about. But some of them I can't really talk about quite yet because
Sure.
everyone has their own media department, and
Yeah.
they want to kind of like manage the declaration of this thing. But I'm working for some really good stuff for AWA, as well, which is a fantastic organisation. But there's a new story coming out there I'm really excited about. But I have two coming out there, coming out soon, and I'm really excited about them. And I think they can be really, really good. For Bad Idea, at the moment coming out is a pirate story called Pirate Queen, and that's fantastic. I mean, I just love it. I think it's one of the best things I've done. The artwork is insane. It's just amazingly brilliant. And so I'd advise everyone to check out the Bad Idea story called Pirate Queen. Over at Vault Comics, the good people at Vault Comics, I'm doing a story called Human Remains, which is a kind of a horror, nasty, disgusting story, but with a lot of humanity as well. And so I'm really excited about that. And Aftershock Comic, I've got a really good relationship now. I've got some really good ideas with them, and I'm really liking some of these smaller independent companies that have been springing up.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of fantastic young companies coming up, and I hope they're the future of comic books, because I think they really give a great platform for people like me and Duncan and other people to really express themselves, really tell stories that they want to tell, and try to use comic books, I think, the way they should be used, which is to tell the stories, personal stories that our creators want to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think that I think.
Excuse me, may I say that, of course, Marvel Comics, the long-awaited Excellent, with me and Mike Allred, which is kind of like in the ecstatics world, is finally going to be published early next year. COVID kind of pushed it back quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's finally going to come out, I think, in February next year, and it's been amazing working with Mike Allred and Laura again, and the artwork is just as brilliant as it was in Ecstatics, and it's a new story, it's a new superhero team, It's a new superhero comic, but it involves some of the old characters that you will recognize. So if you like,
can you go home again on a book like that? Is it hard? Is it easy to?
well, you have to have something new to say.
Yeah.
It's quite simple. I think that if you're trying to say the same thing, yes, a waste of time. But if you've got something new to say and the world has changed and you're using that template to talk about something else, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. All right. Awesome.
Just
sounds great. That sounds great. All right. So the last question we usually wrap this up with is this is a series of videos that we do, conversations. We're somewhere at 230, something like that, of these things with this one. And we get a lot of people who watch these, not just because they like comics, but also people who want to make comics. You know, but they're not quite there yet. They haven't made the leap. So what's your piece of advice to an aspiring creator who would like to do work in comics? It can be a physical thing. It can be an emotional thing. It can be a technical thing, a spiritual thing, anything you want. But what would be the piece of advice that you would give someone who wants to work in comics? Duncan, you want to start, or?
Make sure you really want to do it. I mean, really want to do it, because it'll take everything out of you that you've got and ask for more. So be prepared to do that. You'll be fine. And just try and hang on to the reason you wanted to do it for in the first place. If you can keep in mind why you wanted to draw it, it's like the tough times doing it will be a lot easier, if that makes sense. You know, it really depends on the person, on the individual ultimately. For me, I find it tough. I've always found doing comics hard, but I make them harder for myself, I guess. It's my nature. But it's the only way I know how to do it. So I put up with it. Yeah.
I love that answer. That answer is both beautiful and heartbreaking. I love
it's
that.
real.
I get it.
Two guys I know best in comics: Sean Phillips, Charlie Adlard, to the fastest guys, most prolific.
Yeah,
that's hard.
Yeah.
And I still get on with them, still like them.
Yeah.
They do great work. But and then there's me. I kind of like the complete antipathy to their approach. But it's kind of like you've got to be yourself at the end of the day, and you can try and wish it away. But it's kind of like it's like, well, just pay for the therapy or just accept it and just get on with it. And I kind of get on with it.
All right, Pete. Same question to you.
Well, I can only talk from a writer's point of view. I think rather than trying to be a clone of someone else that you like, you have to find a way of saying what you want to say and being yourself. And as Duncan said, you have to know why you're doing it, why you're doing a particular story, why you want to do comics. And I think that know why you want to do it and then hold on to it. And but that's, every single individual story is the same. Why do I want to write this? Why do I want to write this in comic books? Why is it best suited for comic books? And I think they're the important questions.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Well, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to be with us this morning. Well, your afternoon, but my morning. I really, I especially want to thank you for this amazing book. This is really a terrific book, and it touches people. It makes people think, and here we are, almost 30 years later, and people are excited by it. And this new edition. Mwah, this is the prettiest one of the classic clubs that we've been able to do. Also, if people at home, hey, put me on a one shot, will you, Jordan? For people at home, there's a book plate that comes with if you buy and signed by both of them. and it's original. You can only get it from us, and it's comes with every copy you buy from us. So you should buy a copy from us. Enigma was this month. Coming up, the next show is Wednesday. We're talking to N.K. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell about Far Sector for the Adult Club. And then next Sunday, we're talking to Kelly Fernandez about Manu, which is a really fun and funny book for the Kids Club. Next month's Comics Masterpiece Club will be Whiteout. And we've got Greg Rucka here to talk about making comics, which should be a awesome conversation. So, you know, hopefully you all enjoyed all of that and you go, I want to be a member of this club and get all these cool books every month, because that's a good thing. I want to make some thanks, and my thanks are especially to Jordan, who's running the camera and doing the show. I want to thank my staff, Zoe and Kat, who I could not exist without existing here. And I want to thank Pete and Duncan for making this book. I want to thank you for taking the time, but I want to thank you for making comics. I profoundly want to thank you for that, because if you guys didn't make comics, I wouldn't have anything to sell. And so you know, I love comics, and I love you guys, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right. We'll see you guys next month.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Yeah, cheers, buddy.